Guys, thank you so much for being here. We're just getting going with Witching Hour Festival. Thank you for coming. My name is Matt Steele. I'm the publisher of Little Village. We co-present Witching Hour with the Englert Theater. This festival is dedicated to exploring the unknown, discussing creative process, and presenting new work. Before we get started, I wanted to thank those who made this event possible. Witching Hour receives grant support from the Iowa City Coralville Area Convention and Visitors Bureau and the Iowa City Downtown District. And our festival sponsors are the University of Iowa Libraries, Digital Scholarships and Publishing Studio, Merge and the Iowa City Area Development Group, University of Iowa School of Music, Obermann Center for Advanced Studies, Midwest Ticks, Velvet Coat, Revival, Feed Me Weird Things, Adamantine Spine Moving, Reunion Brewery, Film Scene, Flow Media, Iowa Shrimp Farms, Scope, Iowa Public Radio, the Tuesday Agency. We are here at the Iowa City Public Library, whose sponsorship makes all Witching Hour programming at the library free and open to the public. So keep your eye out for more ICPL events. Those are all free and open to the public. We thank the library very much for hosting us here. We also want to invite you to a couple of social events. There will be coffee and rolls tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at Merge, Saturday morning at 10. And there will be a happy hour also at Merge at 4 p.m. Saturday. We also want to sustain the conversation and community that develops during Witching Hour after the festival. So we'll be hosting a series of events to keep the conversation going. The first event will be in December. Please reach out to us if you're interested, and if we already have your contact information, we'll be in touch. I hope you can all enjoy a lot of events. Tonight we're going to see the world premiere of DJ Spooky's Explorer 1 remix, which I think really embodies the best of Witching Hour. We're drawing from scientific, visual art, musical traditions, and mixing them up and presenting them in a new and inventive way that will be exciting and I think really uplifting for those that are as concerned as I am about the place of science in our current society. Speaking of things that we're all concerned about the place of them in our society, today we're talking about journalism and newspapers and the well-being of the newspaper industry, particularly local media in our state of Iowa. And we have a great guest, my dear friend, Susan Patterson Plank, Executive Director of the Iowa Newspaper Association, is going to share the best information to make us all feel better about our lives. She promised. So there'll be a presentation followed by a Q&A, so please stick around for the conversation to follow. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. So obviously I'm happy we'll do Q&A at the end, but if there's somewhere along the way that you're like, what? What is that about? I mean, don't feel like you have to wait. And if I know I'm going to hit it later, I'll just tell you that, okay? So feel free. This is a relatively intimate crowd, and I already did this to a person. Congratulations, you're now not the one all the way in the back. If you feel the need to come forward, please do. Closer is always better. It is my pleasure to be here. I love speaking about lots of things, but this is really a passion of mine. Obviously, it's what I do for a living. When people ask me what I do and they want something besides a title, what I tell them is I'm trying to save democracy. And then usually people kind of giggle, and I go, nope, really, seriously, that's really what I'm trying to do. It's what I want to do. So it's a real passion of mine personally, and I'm happy that I had the opportunity to come talk about it. So going to talk about a few things, highlights, right? I'm going to talk about some of the fascinating happenings. You may know a little bit about the fact that we have a Pulitzer Prize winning newspaper in Iowa just this year. I'm going to talk about some research that we have commissioned that's brand new. Matter of fact, we have just started releasing it about Iowa newspapers. And then I'm going to talk about what I consider to be opportunities and threats to newspapers in the state of Iowa. So those are kind of the areas I'm going to cover. I love to tell people this number is 277 newspapers. I do this, 277 newspapers in the state of Iowa. That is a huge number of newspapers. We believe, and we haven't found a way to find out if we're lying or not, that we have more newspapers in the state of Iowa per capita than any state in the country. So we are an amazing place to be in the business. And I say the word newspapers all the time. When I say newspapers, please know that most newspapers have websites, and they have mobile, and they have Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and they have all of those things. Some of them have all of them, some of them have some of them. But when I say newspapers, essentially what I'm talking about is that business of content. So 270 newspapers, it's a lot of newspapers. Another fascinating thing to me is the fact that we still have towns in Iowa that have more than one newspaper. Now I have a little asterisk by Des Moines because it's the Register and the Business Record, which is really a little bit more of a specialty publication than a general circulation newspaper. But Iowa City, Ames, Storm Lake, Grinnell, Independence, Ottawa, and Dayton. These towns, you can see how small some of them are still supporting 2 newspapers in their town. So that's, in my mind, an amazing thing. Storm Lake is a great story. 10,000 people, 2 newspapers, both very strong newspapers. This is Art Cullen. He's with the Storm Lake Times, and he just this year won the Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing. I think anytime somebody wins a Pulitzer Prize, it's a big, big, big deal, like the biggest deal there is if you're in the business. But to win for editorial writing, I think, is even more special if you grew up in the journalism business. So this is Art and his son, and they own one of those newspapers in Storm Lake. They have a circulation of 3,000 in a town of 10,000 people, and again, it's a 2 newspaper town. Art and his brother have the paper. Tom, the young one getting the hug, is the son. Dolores is a wife. The whole entire company is 10 people, and honestly, I cannot get anybody there to tell me the truth because they always say 10 people, and I've searched and searched and searched, and I think they have 9 people and a dog. So I've asked people who know them better than I know them personally, and I've said, do they really have 10? And that was the person who said, I think they count the dog. I'm like, well, that's okay. That's cool. So, you know, it's kind of a cool thing to know about this family. In the last 100 years, 17 Iowa journalists have won the Pulitzer. 3 newspapers have won. The thing I like about the fact that Art won this is the fact that it reminds lots of people in the business that you can do good journalism and good storytelling and make a difference no matter where you are. And I especially think it's important for people who are maybe at that point in their lives when they're trying to make decisions about where am I going to go to do journalism or to make a difference, whether it's journalism or something else. To think that you can't do that in small communities is crazy, right? This is really a bloom where you are planted story. And so that, to me, is it's a very special thing that they won, in part because of the community that they are in. So a little bit about this story. I don't know if you're familiar with it, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but the Des Moines Water Works sued 3 counties in Iowa for nitrates and water pollution. And those counties really worked hard to put together a good legal fight. And what Art and his family did was they went trying to find the money. Who's getting the money? And they really struggled to get the answer. Well, they finally did get those answers, and that's how they won the Pulitzer. And you'll see they took a lot of heat, right? They're in a town that is a very, very agricultural-driven town. And they took heat from their family and friends, right, in that community. I'm sure their son took it. And, you know, he says, and he is quoted, this is a quote of his, you know, he got pushed back from being anti-farmer. And he says, I'm not anti-farmer. My wife grew up on a farm. I've got shit on my boots. I ain't anti-farmer, but I'm anti-pollution. And that's a quote he gave to national media. But that's a hard thing to do in a little town, right? But amazing, amazing work. So it's a great family, and they've done great things. So, you know, I have to talk a little bit about small towns. And it's interesting, last night I said to my husband, I said, so is there an answer to how many people live in rural Iowa versus not rural Iowa? And then we started having this whole conversation. So how many people in here are from Iowa? Okay. And do you think you're from rural Iowa? Okay, what town, where are you from? Storm Lake. That's awesome. Okay, there's somebody over here.
I'm from Collins, Iowa.
Collins, Iowa. Okay, who thinks they're from rural Iowa and is from a town of more than 5,000? What's your town?
Mount Pleasant.
Mount Pleasant. Okay. So we had this whole conversation at my house just about what's rural Iowa and what's not rural Iowa. And I think in some cases that's the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? And I think it also depends where you came from, right? Because if you're not from Iowa, you kind of think the whole state is rural, right? if you grew up in Des Moines, I didn't grow up in Des Moines, but my kids obviously grew up in Des Moines. You pretty much think everything outside Des Moines is rural Iowa. I mean, everything's very, very relative, right? And so I'm always careful about that, but I just want to talk a little bit about small towns. And, you know, of course, I get the call, will you come speak? I'm like, yeah, I'd love to. And so I started doing a little research, thinking about what I want to talk about. And I ran across the 17 things people who've ever lived in a small town understand. And I'm not going to go through 17, okay, I promise. But I did want to highlight a couple, and that was this one, which says, no one knows where your town is. Whenever someone asks you where you're from, your standard response is, you probably haven't heard of it. It's X number of miles away from other town that you may have heard of, right? So that's kind of how you know you're from a small town. But this story also talked about things that are really exciting in a small town. And they talked about how when you get your first chain store, that's a big deal, right? And they talked about, in order of life, the important things that go on, big things, right? There's the birth, your wedding engagement, your graduation, and you finally got a national retailer. So those are the big things when you're in a small town. Team sports are a big, big deal in small towns. And in part, that's a spot where people rally around. And then, and I swear, you know, I didn't go looking actually for this, but also on her list was getting featured in the local paper isn't a huge deal. The paper is basically the Oprah of town. You get an article, you get an article, you get an article, everybody gets an article, right? But everyone also makes sure that you got a copy of the newspaper, right? So after you're featured in your local hometown newspaper, your aunt and your cousin and your mom's sister and your neighbor, they bring you the newspaper because they want to make sure you have a copy. You'll want some extras of that, right? So that still goes on. So I want to talk a little bit about that before I start talking about the numbers. So I was telling these guys, I love numbers, I love research. I work for the Iowa Newspaper Association. We commission research about every 2 to 3 years. We use Scarborough, who's a national company, Nielsen company, and we use them even though, frankly, they're outrageously expensive because they have a very, very good national reputation. And so that's who we use for this. Just a little bit about methodology, because I always like people to know it's the real deal. They interview 1,000 people. They do a lot of weighting after the fact so that it's reflective of the community. They do the interviews Tuesday through Saturdays and make sure it's all weighted individually, and it's 19-minute interviews. So it's very solid methodology. The margin of error on this research study is ±3, which is pretty darn good. I always tell people, if you're looking at research, you will not very often find a sample size of 1,000 these days. If you start looking at research, just because you see something that looks interesting, you'll see a sample size of 300. You'll see a sample size of 500. You don't really even see sample sizes of 600 that often anymore because it's expensive. The more people you have to talk to, the more it costs. So people really bring that down. So that's why I'd like people to know about this because it helps add some credibility to the numbers. Because there'll be a moment where someone's going to say this, oh, yeah, okay, that's not right. So 2.4 million readers in Iowa. That's how many people read newspapers. So what's that mean? 76% of the population in the state of Iowa reads a newspaper. They either read it in print, they read it online, and I'm going to say online, digitally, whatever that means, or a combination of those. You'll see that most people still are reading it in print. And I think most people are pretty surprised by that. Print is actually 46 if they only read print. The digital is only 9, and then the combo is 21. The combo is actually the one that grows the most over the last few years. That's where you see overlap. Let's see if the going back works. Yes. This is also where I like to remind people, even though I did this once, when I say newspapers, I'm talking about the whole thing, right? And that's why, it's because we put that together. A lot of times, in part because of what I do for a living and what I've done for many decades at this point, is someone will say, what do you do for a living? And after I get past my democracy speech, occasionally you'll get this little moment where you're like, oh, I'm really sorry, I don't read the paper. And then, without even pausing, they'll say something like this. Now, I read it online. And I'm like, that actually counts. We're okay with that, okay? As long as you're reading, we like that. So, remember that 76% number? This talks about the age groups. And we're the first to admit, right? The older you are, the more likely you are to read a newspaper, okay? But let's get back to that 45 to 54. It's still 7 out of 10. Okay? So when you're younger, you're less likely to read than when you're older. But these numbers are not the big gap that people think they're going to be, or the perception. You know, when I talk to people who are in the agency business, here's what they do. Oh, and this really makes me crazy. So if anybody works for an agency, I'm really sorry right now that I'm about to offend you. Nobody reads the paper, especially young people. And then there's like this hand motion, you know, like that, down. And I'm like, you know, it's not. Here's the difference between someone who is older and someone who is much younger and how they interact with newspapers, whether that's print or online. It's a frequency issue. If you are someone who is 65 and above, you are reading every single day, without fail. I work in a business. My mom and dad live in Newton. I live in Des Moines. They get the register. My mother will call me and she'll say, did you read that? And it'll be like, oh my God, I missed that. Because she reads every word on every page, right? I'm the executive director of the Iowa Newspaper Association. In theory, I should be reading every word on every page, but I don't, okay? I still really, like a consumer, I read the stories I'm interested in, and I, you know, flip around, and I read online, I read on Facebook, I read all over the place. But it's a frequency issue. So if you're an advertiser who's trying to reach young people, it's not that newspapers aren't a good fit for you, it's that you have to be a lot more strategic about it. You have to have a campaign that has frequency in it, so you can catch them when they're in. Right? And they're also much more likely, if you're in a market that has 7 days, they're much more likely to be Sundays. We talk about how many people are getting information on their phone. This is no surprise, right? But I think what the surprise is how many times a day people are using their phone to go to the newspaper, and it's a lot. We ask people, do you value newspaper advertising? That's important. 7 out of 10 say they do. And that's important especially right now because this is a little snarky, so I'm sorry. None of the newspapers in Iowa sold an ad to a foreign government during the election. None of them did that. Okay? So the people have, there's a credibility that goes with a business that transfers to you as a retailer, right? And so that matters. So the fact that people read, obviously we're trying to get eyeballs in front of advertisers, but credibility counts, and that is the carryover. People, they value the newspaper advertising. Matter of fact, I always hate to do this depending on mixed company. If I'm in a room full of newspaper people and I find out they're all journalists, you know, there are people who buy the newspaper actually for the ads. Not a bad thing. So this is another one of these, like, I'm going to call it the Mythbuster, right? There's this perception out there right now that the liberal media, right? And so if we ask people, are you anywhere from very liberal to very conservative? Again, the impression would be the people who are the most liberal are the ones who are most likely to be reading the newspaper. But if you look at very liberal and you look at somewhat conservative, those numbers are essentially identical. If we do the plus and minus margin of error of 3%, these numbers hang together pretty darn closely. So that's important. And voting. So part of what I do and what my organization does is we actually sell media across the country. And we work with a lot of PR companies out of DC, quite frankly. And we talk to them about, usually those are the people who are they're advocacy organizations. They're trying to move people to vote, or they're trying to influence people. And so one of the things we ask people, we ask them, have you contacted an official in the last 12 months? And the people who said yes to that, 90% of them are engaged with their newspaper. So if you think about the people who are the most engaged, right, you can take like the hierarchy of engagement politically. You can say, you know, I read, or, you know, I vote in national elections, right? I vote in state elections, right? All these things are more engagement. The people who actually contact their senator or their representative, those are the uber engaged people, right? And newspapers reach them. Another question, among the Iowans who said they voted most of the time in local school board and county elections, newspapers reach 87% of them. Again, that gets back to engagement, because I'm not going to do this. It's like how many people voted in their last school board election, okay? oh God, you're awesome, I love you. You know, unfortunately, that's not a very big number these days. It's not as big as it should be, right? But those people are extremely engaged. Again, which gets back to the reflection of the point that people who read newspapers are very engaged in their communities. Oh, opportunities and threats. Okay. Any questions about the data? Wow, no questions, really? Okay. You're going to have a lot of work to do at the end. So I knew I was going to be doing this, and I reached out to a few of my friends and just said, you know, asked them their opinions. And I really like this. Doug Burns, who's at the Carroll Daily Times, said, rural Iowa is the last refuge in cooperation and collective truth and identity. You know your community because you see how everything is woven together. And I thought that was a really good quote. I put this in here twice, and that was an accident. So close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. Okay. So you can open the back up, right? Just a reminder of what newspapers do is they cover the stuff that's right down on the ground, okay? So when that person talked about the fact that the things that are most important to you if you live in a small town, it was about you are born, you got engaged, you got married, all those things are in your newspaper, right? When Costco comes to town, it's not even when Costco comes to town, right? In her example, it was Costco came to a town nearby. That was her point. It wasn't that it came to my town, it came to a town nearby, right? But if there's a new coffee shop on the main street, that's going to be in your local newspaper. And the sports. And I have my friends and my family because that's a big deal. I see myself and I see people I know in my local newspaper. This is just actually a screenshot of, could be Carol, could be Sheldon. Oh, I think Sheldon. Sheldon's mobile page. You know, they are all over sports. And, you know, when I talk to people who are trying to decide whether they should be buying newspapers as a advertising vehicle, and I talk to them about once you get out of a metro area, whatever that means in that person's eyes, there's no one covering milestones, businesses, sports. There's no one doing that. Only the newspaper business does that. They're the only ones. So Lyndon Johnson, he's talking about Texas, and this is funny because I do think there's a lot about Texas and Iowa that are a lot alike. He says, this is where they know when you're sick and they care when you die, right? It's a sense of place. The people in smaller towns are connected and they know each other. So what threatens newspapers in Iowa? And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to put this into two buckets. Really sorry, I got to flip my page. The first bucket is the bucket that I'm going to call it's on the newspaper, okay? And the second bucket I'm going to call it is rural issues, okay? So when I think about the first bucket and I think about the things that threaten newspapers, it's also what are the things they do well? Because it's the flip of this, right? Newspapers build a sense of community. Newspapers provide continuity. The newspaper is respected for its credibility. It gets back to I know who wrote this story because I know people in my town. It's in the newspaper, it has credibility. The newspaper has an ability to create consensus in their community. Even in the smallest, I mean, Storm Lake, great example again. What was going on, actually Storm Lake is a great example for lots of things. They have lots of things where that community bumps heads with each other, right? The newspaper has the ability to lift that conversation up and act as a leader, and that's part of what they do. And newspapers have commitment. When I get back to the 277 newspapers in the state of Iowa, many of them are still locally owned. And if they are not locally owned, the people who work there have great passion, right? And they care deeply about their community. And they care because they make sure that the pictures are right. They make sure that the names are spelled right. They make sure that the sports scores are in. They have an engagement and a passion about what they do for a living. And that's that commitment. And that's the opposite. When this doesn't happen, that's a threat, right? That sits with the newspapers. So this is again, when I reached out to people and asked them some of the questions, this is what someone said to me. When do newspapers fail? Readers know when their paper is no longer, well, their paper. They know a stale slice of bread or a warm beer when it's served to them, and they can sure tell when the paper's gone flat too, right? So newspapers aren't any different than any other industry. There are good ones and there are ones that are not good, right? I mean, we can talk about any industry and say none of them are perfect. Newspapers who are engaged in doing the things I said before, building community, building consensus, being leaders in the community, they're doing a really good job. Is everybody batting 1,000 on this? They're not. Not everybody's batting 1,000. And this person's point is that people treat their newspaper like it is theirs. It's my newspaper. It's not my newspaper that I'm the publisher. If I'm in the community, it's my newspaper. I don't like what you did. They call when you get upset. I won't bore you with stories where I've answered phones that have been crazy, crazy, crazy. And the best thing can happen is someone calls you because they're ticked off. They care that much to take the time to call and tell you that you've got something wrong. That's like the best compliment there is when you're in the business. Oh my gosh, there's nothing but not everybody does it. But that's the risk when people stop being completely and utterly engaged in their communities. Because again, it's like flat beer, right? I don't really want any of that. And when that happens, everything else starts to erode. So that's a risk that's on the newspaper business. And actually, I say the newspaper business, but that's the risk for any media, local media. Now when I start thinking about what are the other risks that aren't necessarily on the newspaper or the local media, frankly, it's the risk to rural Iowa, right? It's the migration of people leaving small town Iowa, fill in the state, same thing for Indiana or Minnesota. As people leave, that's a risk to the business. School consolidations, I feel really strongly about this, and I understand the implications from a financial standpoint of having a gazillion high schools in the state of Iowa. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be having school consolidations. But when you lose your high school, you lose part of your identity as a community. And when people go to move in and there's two cities sitting side by side and one of them doesn't have a high school, the town that doesn't have the high school is the one who's going to lose people over time. And then local retail. We used to talk about this constantly. When Walmart started opening up, Walmart was going to kill us all, right? And it did do damage. There are fewer local businesses today than there were 20 years ago, right? Amazon is Walmart 2.0. Right? Every time you buy, and don't raise your hands, right? All of us buy stuff from Amazon. I mean, all of us do that. But every time you do that and you didn't buy something from one of your local merchants, right? You're impacting that local retailer. And when you impact local retailers, you impact your newspaper. And in my opinion, when you impact your newspaper, you impact the long-term health of your community. So that to me is a huge risk. So newspapers have to do their job. Right? But as members of our community, we have to support our communities too, because that's how everybody stays in business. And there's a lot of talk about just, frankly, like when Walmart came out. If you're a local retailer, how do you stay in business if you're competing with Amazon? And there's lots of stories about this, right? And it's about how, in this case, this is a Forbes story, but it talks about how you have to be an expert. And they interview somebody who sells pet supplies. And his point is, I'm an expert on all these things about pets, right? So people come to me for my expertise. But if I'm just selling the dog food, no one's going to come to me. And how do you become a specialized expert in your community on the thing that you do? When you have something that's a commodity, you're at risk. So economic development is really important. We do a program that's a 5-month program for people who are up and coming in the industry that we do a different topic every month for 5 months. And one of the topics we do is economic development, because what we're trying to impress upon people who are in the business is that to help your business be strong and thrive, as a publisher, you need to care a lot about economic development. Now, does that mean that you should lay down and not write the real story? No, you should be writing the real stories. But helping your community thrive economically, that's really important. So when someone says to me, what puts us at risk? Is my local economy healthy? And then right? Because if I don't do this, someone will be like, what about the internet, Susan? Yep, the internet, it's real. I was an executive of digital development for about 5 years, very early on. And there's a lot of things right now where people are look back about 15 years and say, did newspapers make mistakes by going online? Did they make mistakes by not going online fast enough? Did they make mistakes by opening up their content? I mean, there's a lot of debate today about that, about if we could roll back, how would we have done that different? But the reality is, and again, this is my opinion, in rural Iowa, in smaller communities, the internet is less of a risk than the risk to small town Iowa. Because again, you get to small town Iowa, that news about sports and births and deaths and all those things aren't coming from Google. And if they're coming from Google or Facebook or wherever, most of the time that's coming from the newspaper, right? And this is Sheldon, right? And they're all over. They've done a really good job. So they have a really strong print product. Their print product is amazing. It's well designed. It's well written. It's a good newspaper. But they're on Facebook and they're on Twitter and they have done a good job and they're pushing stuff out all the time. Right? They're a weekly newspaper, but they are out there all the time. So, if newspapers close, what happens, right? There's a lot of news out there that originates from newspapers. I mean, in my mind, that's a real risk. If a newspaper goes out of business, there will not be people to get actual news because most news comes from newspapers. And then we talk about, newspapers do a really good job of covering just kind of normal, average, everyday people, right? They're not covering the big sensational stuff that's national. They're covering things that are next door. When newspapers have layoff, usually investigative reporting is suffering. And newspapers may not be cool, but they still make money. There is certainly a impression that newspapers are going broke. And I'm going to do this like all businesses. Some of them probably are, but a whole bunch of them aren't. Now, there are some very large companies that I will tell you make less money than they used to. Auto dealers make less money than they used to. There's lots of people who their margins have shrunk. That is not an industry exclusive experience. But talking about investigative reporting and as newspapers, if that is impacted, the best job is to be a corrupt government official because nobody's watching you. And that's super unfortunate, right? Because there aren't very many TV stations going to the zoning meeting. And there aren't very many radio stations or bloggers going to school board meetings and watching budgets and reading the minutes and reading public notices and doing all that stuff that frankly is not sexy. But it's what keeps our communities safe and sound and financially in good shape. So I love this quote. I know, shocking. Were it left to me to decide whether we should have government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. Okay, now I do this. Okay, questions?
I'm Robert, and my question is, are there any towns that have just digital newspapers?
Well, in Iowa there is.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, in Iowa. I'm going to do this. There's kind of one. Elkhorn, about, it's, Elkhorn, you're from a small town. When you say Elkhorn, I don't know, about 90 minutes west of Des Moines, I think. Anybody know? I think that's where it's at. Where? Near Harlan. Does that help anybody? Yeah, okay. I know exactly where Harlan's at. They had someone who started a newspaper really kind of on Facebook. It hasn't gotten a lot of traction. I will also tell you about the Dayton. If you remember, one of my slides talked about, thank you very much. And did you see what he got? Yeah. Dayton, that really small town who had 2 newspapers, fascinating story. There was one newspaper, and then there was a group of people, who did not think that newspaper was doing a very good job. So they started an online newspaper. And they did that for a while, and then they started a print version. So now the town is a 2-newspaper town, truly. But they started out as digital. The business reality of this is that there is still more money to be made in print than online. Thank you for your question.
I've got one for you. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I read a quote recently. Jeff Bezos, Amazon, acquired Washington Post. He said, Washington Post is going to grow its way to profitability. Of course, he's got all the money to try that with. Does that apply to other papers too? Especially in Iowa City, our perception of what Gannett has done is an effort to shave its way to some kind of profitability at a cost of its real value.
I hate that question. There are certainly companies who are saving their way to profitability. There's no doubt about that. I will tell you that there are a lot of newspapers in Iowa who are very focused on, I'm not going to say that it's not an expense cut, being very selective about how they do it versus letting go of journalists. So you see more people saying, I'm over the fact that I need a press in my back room, right? I see newspapers doing a better job of diversifying, in part to drive money so they can do the things they want to do. Interesting thing in Carroll, they have these really interesting single copy machines that have a video on them and like a feed, like a news feed. And back in their office, they keep it all going. And they sell ads on that. And they're making pretty good money off of that. And it helps them support journalism. And I will tell you, the newspaper in Carroll is a very strong newspaper. I mean, financially, I think they're very strong, although I don't have access to their financials. They really have good reporters, and they pay them very appropriately, is what I would say. So I'm not sure if that's a really good answer, but that's the best one I have.
There was an extensive article in Columbia Journalism Review about what Gannett is doing.
No, I feel like I have to do this whole thing. I spent 20 years at Gannett prior to the job I have now, so that's all I'm going to say. Somebody can ask me, what did I do well about?
My name's Emery. I'm a former community newspaper publisher and editor and worked in the business many years. Just had a couple of observations, and I'd like you to respond to them and tell me if they match what you see. One is that the newspapers in the slightly bigger towns of Iowa, the Iowa Cities, the Burlingtons, the Des Moines, are really in a tougher spot than the county seat papers out in the state. Mm-hmm. And secondly, it seems to me that the Northwest Iowa Reviews and the Carrolls and the other rural Iowa papers that have really done an aggressive job taking care of their franchise are still strong and very profitable and can stay that way, but in many other markets, such as the one I worked in Mount Pleasant, where things have been let go and gone downhill, I don't know how in the world they're ever going to get it back.
So the first question about mid-sized towns versus smaller towns, and I'm going to say this because I'm about to do generalization, and I think that's really dangerous, right? I think it's a dangerous thing for me to do. I think the reason is, and you're going to do air quotes, easier in some of the smaller markets is because it's a less competitive market, right? They are less likely to have a TV station. They're less likely to have a radio station. They're less likely to have a competitive bloggers. It's less competitive, and so it is easier. Easier being very relative here. There are exceptions to that. Sometimes when you point out a town, my question back, because and I know more about Newton than I do Mount Pleasant, which is why I'm going to use Newton as an example. Actually the paper in Newton does very well, and it has done a good job of staying really true to its community. But that's a town lost Maytag, right? And I know Mount Pleasant had some manufacturing, I believe, that they lost. That gets back to I don't want to say fault, because that's not the point. If the newspaper went downhill, is that because their community went downhill? I mean, those things really are really connected. We're starting, we'll be starting a campaign where we're going to start talking to people about strong communities, strong newspapers. or vice versa, strong newspapers, strong communities. The fact is they're so closely connected. But yeah, I think there are the small to mid-size that are less competitive, and they have really invested in their franchise that do well. Harlan is the family that owns Harlan. They actually help fund that leadership program I was talking about earlier. And I love the fact that one of the things they say out loud to this group of people is, there is money to be made in this business. Go find a town and buy a newspaper. Are you coming to the microphone? You're going to get a candy bar?
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
So my name is Ryan Hall. I'm going to make a quick plug for an event going on October 29th here at the Iowa City Public Library from 12 to 4. There's an event called Is This What Democracy Looks Like?
I'm going to wait till the commercial's over before I get back to you.
Yes, rightfully so. So thank you for holding me to that. So we're going to be speaking with social justice activists, different media leaders in the community. This is being hosted and presented by Midwest Telegraph, a new media cooperative that I'm a part of, Press Citizen, Iowa Watch, and Little Village. And so we're hoping to interlink media with social justice and trying to kind of bridge the gaps and silos in the community. And so my question,
Oh, that was a question.
which I have one, so, and I only have one for the Hershey bar, so no. My question is that I first really encouraged by Art Cullen and the Times to really do the hard-pressing sort of media to hold corporate agriculture accountable. Having said that, really hard-pressing journalism is difficult to do when your revenue stream is really reliant on larger businesses to help fund it. So,
I want to do this. Amen. Yes, you are absolutely correct.
so how does journalism in the future be very pressing and be critical while, you know, tiptoeing that line to where they can still exist because of funding streams?
Yeah.
And what does that balance look like?
Well, and that is a question that, even though it feels more, it feels bigger today, is a question that if you had been in the business for 20 years, we were having that conversation 20 years ago, right? I mean, that has been going on forever, even though you may not feel like it today. And for me, my short answer is you have to be really good and credible, right? So that if you don't like, I mean, Art Cullen's a great example, right? Because he was right. I mean, he was right. And so you really got to be a really good journalist, so that when you go to the soccer game, if the other soccer parent doesn't like you, at least you can sleep at night, right? And the fact is, when those controversies happen in a community, it's really, and this can be hard with advertisers, but the real answer is, man, people are really reading this. We are really engaged in the community. If you want to get people in your shop, you should be with us right now, because we're all over this and the town is all over it too. But it's a fine line. It's always a fine line. I mean, I have at one point I had become very good friends with an auto dealer. And auto dealers, very big advertisers, right? And so one night, auto dealer friend calls me, and it's actually after I was not in the newspaper business. And auto friend says to me, "I am so angry, Susan." And at which point he told me all the reasons he was angry at the newspaper. And then he said, "I'm pulling my advertising." And I said, "Seriously? Shut up. You know you sell cars. You sell cars. So if you want to pull your advertising, you're just hurting your business. So you want to vent at me, you vent at me. I will take it." Right? And then go back tomorrow morning and keep advertising, because you know you're selling cars and you know I'm right. Right? But you kind of have to find your way to do that in your community. Every community is different. So, and let's do this. When's your event?
October 29th, Sunday from 12 to 4.
Too much information. People can only keep so few things. October 29th, and how do they learn more?
You can go to midwesttelegraph.com.
Okay.
And you can also take a flyer from me.
Take a flyer. Okay. We're good friends of Iowa Watch.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I will not accept that. I'll let the next question.
Okay. Excellent.
That's fine. And just point out one thing that Ryan didn't tell you in the course of civic engagement. Ryan is a candidate for Iowa City Council. And the election is November 3rd. I'll just point that out. I've lived most of my life in Iowa City or similar-sized towns, but I have been in other smaller towns for shorter periods of time. And my question is similar to what Ryan's talking about, civic engagement, government level activity. What I observed, and it is a generalization like you were giving just a moment ago, what I found in the smaller city town newspapers, less of that discourse took place in the paper, but a lot more of it took place in the community. I had to learn for a while where to go to, who to talk to. It didn't appear in the newspaper, but there was plenty of discourse going on, but it was gossip and it was secondhand and it was sometimes primary source research that I had to do. And I think some of that, again, it's a generalization, comes from the nature of a smaller town where the relationships are more like a web, and the idea of offending someone is a higher priority than talking about an issue that can have multiple sides. But also, I think some of it does get to the advertising, just like you were talking about. And Iowa, for better or worse, has a good grade of size of towns. Do you see anything similar to that of a town of 500 or a town of 1,200 in a paper that they may have, as opposed to a town like Mount Pleasant or even something less than a county seat town, as far as the degree to which they cover civic engagement, civic involvement?
There's no doubt it's easier to do the hard stuff if you're in a bigger market. I mean, it is. I will tell you without naming the market because I don't want to put this market on the spot, but I will tell you there's a town in Iowa right now that's very, very, very small. And the newspaper has 3 employees, okay? And that includes the one who owns the newspaper. So we're talking a small town, small newspaper. And that person, that publisher, is all over the fact that she is confident that inappropriate spending is happening in her city council. And she is all over it and working with the Iowa Freedom of Information Council to try to figure out how to do that. And God bless her because she did not grow up a journalist. She owns a newspaper. She didn't grow up as a journalist, so she's totally trying to figure out how to do this. And so she's a good example of someone trying to do that in a small town and is probably taking off people. And we're talking about a town who, like, Main Street is like from here to there, to that wall, right? I mean, it's small. There's exceptions to all the stories. Yes, it's easier to write tough stories in big communities because you don't have to go to church with those people.
I'll do one more.
You only get one,
I'll take that chocolate, please.
Yeah.
What's the trajectory of journalism as nonprofit endeavor?
Oh, gosh, good question. I don't know. I think that's fascinating. And who is doing that? Philadelphia is doing that. Not Philadelphia. Okay, it doesn't matter. It was there sometime earlier this year, and what they're doing is fascinating, and they are a nonprofit at this point. I think it's a fascinating model. I will tell you there's a newspaper in Iowa who's trying to figure out how to do it. It's a fascinating model because it gets back to the strong newspaper, strong community, strong newspaper, right? And if I'm trying to keep my community strong, I need to have a newspaper, right? It's like I need to have a local banker, I need to have a local newspaper, and, I need maybe have a bar is good, But I mean, you need there's some key things you need in your community to keep it strong, and a newspaper is one of them. I think it's going to get a lot more talk and a lot more people trying it. It's hard to figure out financially. It's just hard to get to that model. Nonprofit's tough. Have you had a candy bar? No.
I don't think
Okay. Yeah. We're so nice, aren't we?
it's not really a question, but kind of following up what Matt said and what your answer, like one really fascinating model as far as how community supports a newspaper, for me personally, is Berkeley side. Could you talk about that?
This may not be where you're going. So in 2008, we had this recession. And that became even harder to work in the newspaper because to me, that was like, oh my God, I hated the fourth quarter and then 2009. People would come up and they would be like, oh, Susan, I'm so sorry you work at the newspaper. And I was like, if you want to do something for me, go buy a car. Go buy a car. Go buy a house, right? And so that, I think newspaper people and journalism people have to get more comfortable saying, you have to support this economically to make this work. Right? The thing that's interesting to me is that in the last, I hear this a little less now, but I used to hear all the time, no one reads the newspaper. That was the thing everybody would say. And I'd be like, the industry doesn't have a readership problem. People read news. It's an economic issue. It's a business model issue. And I get back to the whole, to have the business model work, you have to have you have to have business. Right? And so I think we got to get better at saying, if you like this stuff, if you like investigative reporting, if you like knowing whether your government officials are corrupt or not, you buy a car, preferably from a local dealer who is supporting its newspaper. You know? Did you get one of these? You're like, no. I've got like people like, no.
I know your focus has been mostly on rural newspapers, partly because they're prospering. I think the implication is that some of the larger metro areas are struggling. I'm wondering what communities might be able to do to stem that tide. One of the problems, I think, is ownership of those papers doesn't have a stake in the community. Gannett is more interested in national numbers, and they will cut across the board, regardless of where resources are needed. Lee Enterprises, Trunk, they all do that sort of thing. What can some of these towns, Cedar Falls, 35, 40,000 people, they don't have a newspaper. They had 2 30 years ago. Both of them bought out by other companies, eventually closed them, folded into other media companies.
I feel, first of all, I want to do this. I feel like you have a lot of angst. So come here. He's like, no, I'm not. I'm hugging on you. Oh. First of all, I'm going to do like a national perspective.
Sure.
Right? Because I'm always really careful about that when I'm in Iowa. And then I'm going to try to get back to the whole, what about all these people being bought out by corporations and corporations bad? And I try to be really careful about that because the fact is I have 277 members and a lot of them are corporations, okay? And by virtue of being a corporation does not make you a bad person. So I know you all know that, but I feel an obligation to say that out loud, okay? From a national perspective, Des Moines is not a big market. I mean, it's not a big market. I can say confidently, pretty darn confidently, that the Des Moines Register is profitable. It gets back to the question, is it harder in bigger markets? Yes, it's harder in bigger markets. Is it harder if you're owned by a corporation because you have less local stake? I could argue yes. I mean, it's hard for me. What can they do? It gets back to the story's the same, right? If you're in Waterloo, and you want a strong newspaper, you need to support the businesses that support newspapers. I mean, I don't mean to be like a broken record, but that math problem is the same in every community. Now, what you have in some of those mid-sized markets, right, is you have the big box retailers, right? And as consumers, we're so excited about them, right? You get back to the whole, I'm excited about my birth, my wedding, the Costco in the nearby town. We're very excited about that. It's cool. It's shiny. But that's kind of like, there's a big campaign to eat local in lots of places in Iowa, right? And I'm like a crazy eat local person. Even when I go out of town, I'm like, okay, that looks like it might be a chain. Are you sure it's not? I want to, but we don't, there's Shop Small Saturday, right? Saturday after Thanksgiving. But we haven't, this is like, oh, wow, Susan on soapbox. As a society, we're not owning, this is my opinion, we're not owning some of the things about you. We should be more engaged on shop local over like we do eat local, right? We should be, is there a local, as close as you can get to local, right? And sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's like, okay, well, this is a franchise, but at least it's owned locally. I mean, and again, I'm not like, I shop at Target. I mean, I'm not like, super pure. I mean, but that's, to me, it's part of it. And I don't have a good answer for that. If I did, I'd be making a whole lot more money than I am. So it's a really bad answer. Can we end on a good answer? Yeah, it was a good question.
You commented on the fact that there was that small paper that basically started up as essentially like a blog, it sounded like.
Yeah.
And then they turned it into an actual print paper. And it stemmed from a person's interest in, their passion about where the money was being spent in their community. Are there resources that you could help people? I mean, you said this was not a person who was not a journalist. Are there resources for people who want to do that sort of thing in their community? Maybe not a good question. Sorry.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. I feel like there's a whole bunch of questions in there. So
Yeah.
one thing I want to address, because it's something that doesn't come up very often. Part of the benefit of having a print newspaper is once, I'm going to say she because it's a woman who has it, once she became a print newspaper and became what I'll call an official newspaper, and I'm using this because it is Iowa code. The Iowa code says when a newspaper is an official newspaper, there are things they have to have done. They have to have published, they have to have a postal permit, periodical postal permit. They have to publish 50 out of 52 weeks. They have to have been, right, there are all these things they have to do to be an official newspaper. And once you're an official newspaper, you have the opportunity to get public notices. And public notices are ads that the government has to run and they have to pay the newspaper to do. So there's a benefit for her when she became a newspaper. I mean, she had to wait that year, right? Her year was up. She had a little application to us because that like helps in the endorsement. Can I now be an Iowa Newspaper Association member? Why, yes, you can. Does this mean I can go get legal ads, Susan? Yes, it does. Go forth and conquer. So that's part of that transition. Where can I get help? So this is interesting. Small Business Association. I mean, a newspaper isn't any different than any other industry. I would go there. It's always interesting. Occasionally people will call me, and so somebody started a newspaper in a town in Iowa probably 9 months ago, and I happen to know the person. There was a group of 5 people doing it. I happen to know one of them because she was a large advertiser of ours, right? So she calls me up. She's like, Susan, can you help me? And I'm like, yep, here, do this, do this, do this, do this. And then at one point I had to say to her, we have to stop talking about this because the fact is I'm the executive director of the Iowa Newspaper Association and you're starting a newspaper in a town where one of my members exists. I can't help you put one of my members out of business. So that's all, because normally what you would think is, well, you would call me and I would help you start a newspaper. And I will help you so far, and then I will be like, sorry. But usually what I do to those people is I say, here's some people to call, right? Here's some people who you should find a way to connect with. And I almost always know who those people are. I feel like there were more questions than that.
I might have just stringed a whole bunch of questions together. So I think you covered, basically.
I'm close.
Well, yeah. I was just
Okay,
asking
you can talk.
basically-
I'm not going anywhere afterwards. If there's
Okay.
more you want to ask me, you can. So, okay. He doesn't want candy bars. Okay. See, aren't the questions more fun?
I was just curious. So when you had the stats about how many newspapers each town had, are you counting only the ones that that are official newspapers according?
Yes, I'm only counting the ones that are official newspapers, but there are very few that are not.
So there is a.
So yeah, there's more than that out there.
Okay.
Those are people who are official
I know in
newspapers.
Iowa City there is a thing called. Oh, there are a lot of things in Iowa City, but there is a thing called Prairie Progressive, which is subscription only, and I think they publish like 3 or
Yes.
maybe 2 times.
The 277 are only general circulation newspapers. So they meet all those guidelines I said. They cover general news. They publish 50 out of 52 weeks. They've been in business for more than a year. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of, they have a subscription base. So if you're free, sorry, this is, Matt and I are very good friends. If you're a free distribution, you can't be a member of the Iowa Newspaper Association. There's lots of newspapers that are not in the 277. That has a lot to do with public notice advertising, which Matt knows all about. He knows why. So, and obviously I'm a friend of the alternative press.
Friend of the alternative press. I'll just thank you from here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. You guys have been lovely.